Okay, so I'm going to talk about something today that I hopefully know an awful lot about and something that I care an awful lot about. I called the talk Developing Talent because it's a great play on words. Thank you. It's about being a developer. But before we get started, I have a game for you, or a task or an exercise. It depends how you want to play it. I'm going to give you 60 seconds to memorise this, and that is all I'm going to tell you. And that 60 seconds starts now. You can talk if it helps, by the way. Yeah, you can do that. No, that's a way. Yeah. 20 seconds. Four, three, two, one. Okay, I'm not going to tell you anything about this task for now, but I will come back to this later. The thing I should do first, the right thing to do, is to introduce myself. My name is Emma Burstow. I won a lovely award this year, and it's the only good picture of me from all of Code Garden, so it's not just a show off. I am a .NET developer. I work for a company in Reading called Powered by Pi. I help maintain their code base and work with integrations with other pieces of software. So I work mostly with APIs now, but I spent the last 3 years working as an Umbraco developer, building websites for some wonderful companies, and that's what brought me into this world where I've been very, very looked after. So that's me now, but this is me then. In this picture, I was 24, which means that these children are now old enough to go to the pub with, which is utterly bizarre. And this was 4 members of my Year 7 tutor group. So I started teaching in 2006, and I was an English literature teacher. I did a year of training. Most of that time I was based in schools, but some of it I was based in university. And one of the things that we had to do a lot of at university was learn about learning. It was learn about teaching, but really learn about learning. And learning, it's something that we take for granted. Quite often we think about the end goal, what it is we want to know, but we don't spend enough time thinking about the process of learning. And that's what I'd like to do a little bit of today. I'm going to check my notes because I'm terrible for not even looking at my notes during these things, and then I miss things. So one of the things that I learned about learning in my first couple of weeks was that people learn in different ways, and this won't be news to any of you, because when I meet people who are developers, I say, I'm just kind of learning things still. Everybody says, so am I. Nobody says, oh, it's fine, because I actually know it all now. So I think you would worry about what kind of developer you were talking to if they said that. So we're all still learning, and I think that we all have our different ways of approaching it. By now, some of us who are very, very experienced will have stopped interrogating our own ways of learning, and I want you to try and unpick some of that today. So we used to talk about differentiation, and differentiation meant that as a teacher, were you able to teach the top and bottom and middle end of the ability spectrum? So we used to have teachers who were amazing top set teachers. When they had a class of really, really bright students, they did their job beautifully, but they hated teaching the bottom sets because they felt it was crowd management. And then we had the opposite end of the scale. I was great at the bottom end, to be fair. Crowd management was fine. But part of the reason I enjoyed teaching the bottom end was because it made me unpick the way that I learned things. I had to become stupider to understand how you would approach learning from the very beginning again. And that's a really valuable thing to do, to try and unpick. Some teachers and some mentors, with all the best of intentions, might be so brilliant at what they do, they find it incredibly difficult to tell someone who doesn't know the basics. And that's when we get into this habit of saying, oh, you just do this and you just do that. And then someone like me gets into the habit of going, oh, well, I should know that. So I'm not going to admit that I don't know that. I'm going to have to go away and Google that. And then I haven't accessed anything beyond it. So today we're going to try and become a little bit stupider to make us a little bit smarter. So that's my plan. I'm going to check my notes and take a deep breath. So if you can teach a person to learn, they will be fine at whatever they then go on to do. If you can learn to be a good learner, and this isn't like motivational crap, this is just true. If you can learn to be a good learner, then you can get good at whatever thing you have the time, enthusiasm, and passion to put your energy into. So today, by making you think about the process of learning, I hope to make you a better learner. I didn't check my notes. I was going to ask you to do something. So because I have this tradition of teaching, I feel very uncomfortable standing up 40 minutes and lecturing, so I'm going to make you do some of your learning yourself. And that means we will get to talk to each other, so you can thank me for that later. I am going to ask you to turn to someone. It can be someone you know, it can be someone that you're sitting near to, and I want you to describe to them the last thing you learnt. I don't want you to talk about what it was. I want you to talk about how you approach that learning. And I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to do it. If I give you more, you'll get rowdy and I'll have to pull you back in. So you can have 2 minutes. Go. Okay, 3, 2, and 1. Yeah, nothing was going to happen when I got past 1, but it always works. It even works on my kids. It's amazing. So forgive me because there's actually something I want to read you from this, which is why I'm holding this. I could have used paper, couldn't I, if I didn't? So the reason I wanted you to talk about the last thing you learnt and the way you learnt it is because I wanted to put you in the mindset of a student. I wanted to put you in a mindset of somebody who still has a lot to learn. And I wanted you to also realise that in this room we have some incredibly experienced people and incredibly experienced developers. And we also have some brand new people. All of us still find ourselves in that position where we don't know what we're doing. And that's not just empowering because it's like, oh, I'm not alone, but it's empowering because we can share the ways that we then overcome that hurdle. So there was a reason that I asked you to do that. We can only be teachers and learners if we are interested in learning. And I believe that in my very stomach, to my very core. There's quite often we approach things with so much complexity in this line of work, and we are happy to drill down and drill down and drill down, but we forget about the things that bring us to that learning in the first place. So when I started school in the 1980s, in the last century, I was good. I was good at school. Always had my hand up. I was bright, and I was not backwards about coming forwards. You probably wouldn't expect that of me, but I was very much the teacher's pet. And I desperately wanted to get things right. And confession, I generally got Bs. I wasn't an A student. For all of my cleverness or my smartness or my articulacy, I never quite managed the A's. And I really, really pushed myself at GCSE, and I got a crop of A's in my best subject, which was maths. I actually got a B. And I went to my teacher and I said, what was it? What was it I wasn't doing? And they said, you just don't have that spark. You just don't have that flair or originality, and so on. That's quite heartbreaking, and so on and so on. But these are all intangibles. I went on to my A-levels. I couldn't really work with those things because they are not tangible things. You can't go home and be like, right, I'll get a revision guide on originality. It just wouldn't work. So by the time I started teaching, I was delighted to find that they'd solved that problem somewhat. And they'd solved it in the form of something called assessment for learning. And assessment for learning came out of a huge, I won't say latitudinal, but it might be a wrong word, experiment. My vocab's gotten worse since I stopped teaching. And they looked at lots and lots of learners, and they came up with, it was Paul Black and Dylan Williams, which I'll share my slides so you can drill down into this too. They produced a review that highlighted that students that learn in a formative way achieve significantly better than they did in my day. And the ultimate purpose of assessment for learning, this entire process, was to create self-regulated learners who can leave school able and confident to continue learning throughout their lives. I think becoming a teacher made me a much better learner. So while we're unpicking our learning, I'm going to give you some of the tools that help us to drill down. I'm also going to look at lots of data. Like, nothing I do here is just me. It's not about me being new to the business. It's not about me learning, because that would be useless to so many of you. But it's about how you can then use some of these tools that I know about and don't always use to become confident learning throughout your years. This was our goal as teachers. This is what we had to do. And we did this by looking at the 4 R's. You have my husband to thank for these slides. They looked absolutely like a year 10 did them before he got his hands on them. So he's available for hire. So the 4 R's were the ways that we tried to quantify how the behaviours of a good learner. And I'm going to teach you the 4 R's. I always forget one, even though I know it all begins with R, but I always forget one. I had to text an old teacher friend. I was like, help me out here, what am I forgetting? The 4 R's are 4 things. I'm going to let you try and guess what they might be by using GIFs. This sucks, this one, so I'm gonna scaffold this. This is reciprocity. It should be teamwork. They wanted another R and they just squeezed this in. We need to be reciprocal to be good learners. We need to work in teams. We need to be good at sharing. We need to be good at listening, and so on. So I'm coming back to that. What could this be? And if you've seen my talk before, or the short version of my talk, this is my long version. Anything? Reviewing is close. Less close. Reflectiveness. I like this slide. Yes! 10 points, James. Ruthless would be great, but it's not. It's resilience, and that's my personal fall down. That's the one that it's not the one I forget. I forget reciprocity because it's a stupid word. But this one I forget. So the way that we did this for students is we broke down, we knew these 4 words. We told them these 4 words. We'd stand in assembly. We'd be like, right, you need to remember the 4 R's. And the kids would roll their eyes till they fell back into their heads. Oh, 4 R's, it's nonsense, so innit, miss? And actually, we found that the best way to teach them about the 4 R's was not to tell them we were teaching them about the 4 R's at all. So we took all the year 7 year group. There were 30 kids in the class. There were 7 classes. And we split the year in half, and we did these exercises outside of the classroom. So one of the ones that I organised, we took a peer group who had very structured social groups. We broke those apart immediately. So they're already uncomfortable and they're already upset. And we put them outdoors. And again, now they're more uncomfortable and more upset. And we had them build a machine using junk to take a massive barrel of water from one end of the field 100 metres down to another end of the field. It was an impossible task. Kids got close, nobody quite managed, but we didn't tell them what we were looking for, and we didn't tell them what we were grading them for. So we got them out, and you started observing types of behaviours, like sullen and sort of, well, this isn't even going to work, why are we doing it? And people immediately trying to take the lead, other people resenting it, clashes between 2 dominant types, and so on. And we watched them really struggle for the morning, which was fun. And they were working away, and they were sellotaping things, and it was a joy to watch these characteristics emerge. Some of the really successful kids were successful without thinking about it. They never knew why they were doing so well, but they were doing bloody well. They weren't the top set kids. That's the other thing. They weren't the top set kids. Unfortunately, they weren't the bottom set kids either. But it was interesting to see who already had the right ingredients. And then halfway through the day, we took them away from what they were doing. Some were relieved. Some were really cross because they were already really stuck into it. and we put them into the library, a huge space, and we started asking them questions. We gave them a booklet, and in this booklet there were spectrums, and they had to mark themselves from true to false. We didn't use numbers because we didn't want it quantifiable. We wanted them to be working on almost on gut. And we asked them to rate themselves against the 4 R's. We never used the 4 R's. We asked them questions like, how far would you say your team was able to recover when you hit a setback? And they sat in their groups and they suddenly became competitive with other groups. They suddenly thought, oh my God, look, we're ticking all these, or, oh, we're ticking these because Marcel wasn't paying attention. And they began to organise themselves. They started looking at their learning behaviours, and they looked at the ways that they were working as teams. And then at the end of that session, we said, what we were looking at was the 4 R's. And a few had already clocked it. Some of the boffins, like I was, were like, oh, Mrs., it's the 4 R's. I was like, yeah, of course it is. What do you think we're doing? And but we didn't need that water. Like, that water could be there or there. It mattered not to us. So I said, yeah, that's what you're doing. You're looking at your 4 R's. We are not grading you on this. This is not just us making you miserable, wet and cold. We are looking at the ways that you engage with your own learning. The surprising thing, what we found out might be surprising, every single team improved. They all went out, and what had started as a full morning's work, maybe like a structure this big, and like I say, it was never meant to be achievable, it was an impossible task, suddenly went halfway down the field. People were then engaging with that task differently. Many of the machines did not work when you poured the water in, but they just kept going. And they enjoyed that task that afternoon because they knew what it was they were trying to prove, trying to learn. Once they knew that the end goal was kind of fruitless, but the process was important, they enjoyed their learning more, and that made them better learners. Now, this wasn't my school. My school, the one that I taught at, has since moved on, but I found this. This is the way that we characterise the 4 R's. And this is level 7. This goes up to level 10. I was really surprised because I thought that these were some pretty sophisticated ways of achieving things. So if you're resilient, you set challenging goals and you modify them according to your level of success. Are you leaving your comfort zone? Are you trying harder things? Do you regularly use a variety of resources to enhance and refine your work? As developers, I think mostly we do. I think mostly we have to go to more than one place. And, you know, thank goodness for Google. How reflective are we? Are we able to demonstrate our skills and review our own performance? Key for me in this, because this is all well and good, many of us are reflective, but we use that reflectiveness to beat ourselves up and just say, well, I suck at this, so I'm super reflective. But you need to be able to engage with the things that you're doing right as well. That's harder for many, not for everyone. And then teamwork or reciprocity. Do you use various methods of inquiry? Can you share? Are you someone that closely guards the stuff you do? You feel weird about sharing it with people because you don't think it will match up, or you feel weird about sharing it with people because you don't want their input because you know what you're doing. A good reciprocal learner is able to engage and then take leadership just in order to crystallise a vision. Right, full disclosure, because it has to come at some point. As a learner, I can tell you so much about learning. Like, talk to me, find me, and I'll be like, and I won't stop. However, I suck at many of these things. Like, it just makes me feel worse about myself as well, because I'm just like, I should really know better than to do this and to do that. But I wrote a list of my failures. I don't need my notes to access these, though, so I'll just tell you them. I manage setbacks badly. I internalise them. I'll take a setback, and instead of thinking, I didn't have the right approach, I think, well, I'm useless. I'm just not ever going to be very good, and so on and so on. I also have a fear of things that are too challenging. If they're too challenging, I shut down. If they're managed in the right way, I can access them. But super challenging things, I'll go to pieces. I will clean my entire house from top to bottom before sitting down to engage with them. I get there eventually, I have to. It's what I get paid to do. But I find those things terrifying. I'm going to move on to talk to you about different mindsets now. I'm also a terrible, terrible example of someone with a fixed mindset. I preach growth mindset. I feel fixed mindset, and we'll go on to that. This isn't motivational nonsense either. Sure, like you can read it and take it to heart and everything, but this is what the civilian response is when I tell people I've become a developer. 9 times out of 10, they say a version of this. Oh, you're brave. And I think, am I? Why? And, you know, we have these conversations. I draw them out on it. It's important for me to know what they mean. And essentially what they say is, to be a developer, you have to be a certain kind of person. It's hard. It's harder than other jobs. And on one hand, I love that because that makes me feel super cool. Because I'm like, yeah, I've got a really hard job, whatever. But then on the other, I go away and I think, oh, God, yeah, maybe they're right. Maybe they're right. Maybe you need to be a special breed of person to do this, and I just don't got it. And it's an interesting conversation because you will have experienced going to dinner parties and you tell people you're a developer and they go, and that's it. That's all they want to say. It's like, well, I can't relate to you then. And for me, having to keep telling people, oh, no, I am though. No, really, I am. You start to feel like maybe you're making it up too. And it's a dangerous way of looking at things. And I'm going to look at language too, and the way, if I've got time, and the way that it affects our perception of ourselves. An interesting thing that happens in the tech community, and this is just something I'll share with you lot, when I tell developers I'm a developer, but that I changed career, they say, that is interesting. Were you technical before though? And they look for something in my past where they can say, there it is, there's a developer gene, you already had it. So it's interesting. I do have something, so it's fine. I've got the gene if such a thing exists. So the 2 kinds of mindsets I've been reading loads about recently, a growth mindset and fixed mindset, and none of us exist entirely in one of these shapes. We all have moments of both. When you have a growth mindset, you are able to approach a task that is too difficult, a task that you can't yet access, and think, right, how am I going to get stuck in? And it's fixed mindset thinking that makes you go, this is too hard for me. This isn't for me. I should pass this on to somebody else. So when you've got a growth mindset, you're not afraid of failure because you have promised yourself, and I keep making this promise to myself, that challenges are exactly what help you grow. That anyone can do anything if they just keep at it. Jackie, your talk, the Amelia Earhart quote, actually brought a tear to my eye. It's tenacity. Like you start, but then it's tenacity that keeps us in the game. We're also not afraid of feedback, I say, because it's constructive. It helps us walk away, it helps us learn, and it helps us grow. But when you've got a fixed mindset, that stuff is scary. That's me, sorry. That stuff's scary because you end up thinking, oh goodness, they're about to notice that I wasn't cut out to do this after all. The other thing you do is you stick to what you know because it makes you feel good. It reinforces the way you see yourself. And when you see yourself as somebody who is just quite good at being a developer, you don't want to take the risk and find out that actually you're not. Because when you have a fixed mindset, you are great or you are not great. You are either capable of greatness or you were born without the gene that enables greatness. And that is dangerous thinking. And it causes us to be protective. It causes us to be protective over our work. It causes us to be protective over our process, which is terrifying because most of our job is the process. The end goal is often weeks away from where we're at any moment. And it also means we're not learning, we're just doing something one way, our own way, and you get tunnel vision. And as I say, I am often there, and I keep this on my desktop because I want to come back and remind myself I either can or can't do it. That's not an option. If I want to remain a developer, I can't see life that way. So My husband's a Napoleon Dynamite fan, and so he put his favourite characters here. I have to believe, my central belief remains, that anyone can become a skilled developer. And I use the word skilled mindfully. I don't want to use the word great, I don't want to use the word brilliant, and I don't want to use the word genius, because these words are words that actually do us, even us geniuses, more harm than they do good. Okay. Right, I want to talk to you about the tasks that we did. It was a horrible task. There were many reasons why it was a horrible task. I didn't give you an outcome. I didn't tell you how many I wanted you to learn. I didn't tell you how to do it, and I didn't tell you if you'd be tested. Is there anyone here that thinks they remembered all the names? Does anyone want to have a go? It doesn't matter because it's not important at all.
Okay.
Go on, Tiff.
Noel.
Yep.
Bonehead.
Yep.
Liam. Florence. Beyonce. Damon.
Yep.
Jimmy. Starting to struggle now.
Where are you at? 10?
Richard.
Yep.
Rolled.
Yep. That was for Duke Fest, that one. Not Danish. Dutch name, that's the one.
I think Johnny.
Stop there, right? So what's that, 14?
Something like that.
Yeah. How did you do it?
I looked at the names and realised they're all bands.
Yes.
So I tried to remember.
So you went with pattern spotting, good. Did anybody also use pattern matching? Yeah? Right, I can recognise these, I can remember some. Did anybody use rote learning, just trying to chant them and remember them? Cool. That's one person not outsourcing their memory to Google, which is good. And speaking of which, did anyone cheat and take a photo? Yeah. Do you know how many people cheated in Holland? It was amazing. Like half the hands went up. Either you guys just didn't admit it, though. Yeah, don't trust. So, I wanted to put you in a position of somebody who is given a task that they have no reason to access, they have no goals to meet, except for one that is impossible, and no way of thinking about how they should approach it. And I also kept you from working in teams. I didn't tell you not to, but you didn't work in teams. And all of those things contributed to make you worse learners. And I want you to think about that when we go into some of the suggestions I'm going to make about how we can help people to become better learners. Right. Set me challenging but achievable goals. Now, I don't want to tell you that goal setting is important because we know that. We live in kind of mindful times where we look at lists and we're very quick to say, you need a list, you need it, and that's great, that's all wonderful. But it's really important to look at how we measure the goals and how we set them. Now, when I'm working, if I'm told, here is something, I'll see you in 6 weeks, I want it to do this, some of us will go away and think, oh, that's amazing, I've got all this freedom. Some of us will go away and think, oh, that's amazing, I've got all this freedom, and then like 2 days in, be screaming and on fire. And then others will start being on fire immediately. Now, this is not a good way of differentiating the way that we set tasks. If we want to allow for different kinds of learning, you need to set challenging but achievable goals. I didn't just make this up, and I didn't just jump on kind of popular rhetoric. I looked into the science behind this, and the reason that I did that is because I witnessed something really curious with my son, who is 9 and loves his Xbox, which is absolutely fine. I completely get that. I love my Xbox too. But watching some of the behaviours around the way that he accesses content on his Xbox and on Xbox Live, noticing how twitchy he can become and how withdrawal symptoms kick in, I started to look at the science behind the way video games, around addiction, and the way video games have used the science around addiction to make their product harder to walk away from, which is genius, really. This is a chemical. Does anybody know what it is? Pardon? Nice. Well done, Ravi. This is dopamine. Now, was reading, I've got A-level biology. I didn't learn it here. I was looking at psychology today, and I was looking at the neuroscience around addiction. And one of the things that I found incredibly interesting is the gambling industry, or the scientists who have been paid by the gambling industry, have broken down a way of having people need your content or having people need interaction with whatever you put in front of them. And the trick is to give somebody small goals that are quite difficult. So we get the biggest dopamine hit when we achieve a task where we have had to take a risk to engage with it. So if you give me now something I can do, I don't get as much of this lovely stuff. If you give me something I can't access and is a million miles away, and I'm sitting here thinking, I'm a fixed mindset person, really, I don't get that because I don't achieve it. But if you give me something and then a map showing me how to get there, I achieve it, this juicy stuff happens. That's science, juicy stuff. And I've experienced this. I've worked on things that look a bit, and I've had some incredible, no, I'm not, we'll come back to the language. I've had some skilled developers around me, and I've spoken to them, and they've just given me little prods, and I've spoken to them some more, they've given me little prods, and when I've achieved my goal, involuntary reaction, arms in the air. And I just sat there and I just like this, and I think, I'm not the only one that feels like that. Actually, that's why a lot of us still do this work, because that moment when that kicks in, like, so what I'm asking you to do is think about how we can hack, essentially, that process, that need for dopamine, that chase, the addiction, and bring it into our workplaces. And we all have different ways of working. Some of us work in small teams, some of us work in big teams, some of us work alone. But if you can harness that by use of Kanban and agile methodologies, or even just in your everyday interactions, if you're a tight-knit group, you can make that work, and you can keep your developers happy and hungry. And that's what you need. So we're still working on my son's Xbox addiction. More on that another time. So this feels better. Achieving one of these, I did it, just one of this pie, feels better than a fraction of the same pie. We just don't get the same hit. And it's really, really important to acknowledge that when we think, well, I've given somebody something to do. Maybe in 2 days, I'm going to check in and I'm going to ask, what's their roadmap? You don't need to lose creativity. You don't need to take that away. But just sit down and say, Emma, that's me, Emma. How are you going to do this? How are you going to achieve this? What are your goals in this? Have you mapped this out? And it's a half an hour thing. It's not a big drain on resources to do things this way. But what you get back will be amazing. Language. This is my favourite one. I talk a lot about how language works and how quite often we can internalise things. And I've already talked about people saying I'm brave and me, that causing me to feel less brave. So I've been reading a book that I'm passing on to somebody later, but I'll tell you what it is, where a scientist called Carol Dweck, she got lots and lots of, thousands of students, and she asked them to sit a difficult test. It was non-verbal reasoning. So when you sit a non-verbal reasoning test, the reason teachers like it and the reason that experimenters like it is because so language barriers don't exist as much. Cultural differences can be basically ironed out because it's all about the way you approach problem solving. And nothing's perfect, so they won't have managed all of that, but they work hard to try to. She got control groups and she got other groups, and she put them in groups of 10 each time, but she did this with thousands of people. She gave them 10 challenging tasks, same tasks to both groups. They were all college students in the first run. They diversified after that they saw results, and then they wanted to make sure that the results were sound. They were challenging tasks, and at the end of those first sets of challenging tasks, they told the control group, you guys must be really smart because you have just bossed this. And then told the other group, you lot, you really approached that well. That was hard, but you worked your backsides off. They went away, had sandwiches, came back, and then she asked both groups, do you want another set of tasks? They're going to be harder this time. Overwhelmingly, the group praised on their effort, said, hit me up, I'll have a go. And the group praised on their ability, nah, no thanks, don't want to. They were putting themselves at risk doing it. They had already been told they were brilliant. They'd been told they were good. And that made them not want to engage with anything too difficult. And I think that's something we probably all know about ourselves, but it is so nice to see it explicitly played out in an experiment. So she asked them, they said no, they said yes. And these people, these geniuses, these brilliant people, she gave them the harder questions anyway. She just gave to them. And she gave the ability praised people the questions too. They sucked. They all failed, and they all failed massively. At the end, she asked both groups how much they'd enjoyed the task. And the groups praised on ability reported far lower scores. The groups praised on process, on behaviours, and on effort enjoyed the tasks, even when they sucked. And that's why language is important. I love being called clever because I have an ego, so it's fine. And I love being called bright. It was part of what got me into this line of work. If I didn't have that slight messiah complex, I wouldn't be here. But it's also what stops me from accessing things that are too engaging, because for as long as you think that I'm brilliant, I don't want to disabuse you of that notion. Nobody would. So when we talk to our teams, when we talk to our developers, we need to say to them, thanks for the work. You really worked on this. Tell me about your process. Tell me about your setbacks. And actually, homework for you, because I'm just on one now, I'm teaching now. I want you to go around this festival and I want you to talk to each other as you would, but I want you to ask each other about one time that you sucked, one time that you failed at something, because those are some of the most valuable interactions I've had with people at all of these conferences. And you'll find that nobody's shy about saying, oh, deployment last thing on a Friday, you would not believe what I did. And if you get stuck, I've got a really long list, so you can always ask me. But it's important to engage with the idea that even the most experienced of us fail often, and we fail hard, but it doesn't stop us from continuing. First attempt in learning, my son told me, is what FAIL stands for. You said that too. You and my son are on the same page. So the minute we stop being comfortable around risk is the moment, good luck, is the moment that our jobs become undoable. In our line of work, being uncomfortable around risk would be disastrous. It also takes the spark out of our work, because for as long as we're just doing something we've already done, we could be doing any job. This job we do because every now and then makes us do that. Oh, that's why I do it. I am going to end on one last thing because I'm conscious. How long have I got? Wow, I've got like 20 more slides, but I talk too much. So communities really, really matter. So one of the studies that I looked at was heartbreaking, terrifying, but something that we can learn from. The experimenter took students from African American communities and students who identified as white and put them into a room and gave them maths tests. Now, the control group, they sat the maths tests. Results were as you would expect, people kind of did well or they didn't. And then with the other group, she had them fill in a form where they ticked their ethnicity before they sat the tests. And in that group, everybody did worse. Everybody did worse. So the white students, I mean, I can't imagine what they were thinking, who have a stereotype, particularly in America, that they're just better at this stuff, sucked more. And the non-white students, where the stereotype is that they don't do as well, also sucked more. And this is called stereotype threat. They did similar experiments, and it's the same people, and I'll share my slides so you can see, where they did it with men and women. They had maths tests. They put men and women into a room, asked them to do their worst. Before one group, each time, they were told that gender differences are shown in achievement. They were told we often see differences in ability between genders. Didn't even say what. You can guess what happened. The women did worse. If you can't see you in your line of work, it's going to be a harder journey. And we can't do this we can't always do this in our office because we work in small teams or we work alone, but we need to do it with our community. And I think this is where the strength lies in the Umbraco community. One of the reasons I'm still in this job is because I've been looked after here. And that's no coincidence. There's data behind that. If you can see yourself, you're going to face setbacks with more confidence and more competence. And that's just data. So when we have a junior, for instance, get them to Umbraco events. When we have, I've had somebody say to me, oh, I've just brought the first woman onto my dev team. What would you suggest? And both me and Carol said, get to meetups, get them to meetups, get them to festivals, because you need to see that it's not impossible. You need to see that there are other people. Stereotype threat is something that we don't even acknowledge how often it creeps into our language and it creeps into our way of thinking too. So communities help us to be less fixed-minded too. Doesn't feel like a natural ending, but it is the ending because the time is up. So I will be available to shout the other 10 slides at anyone who wants to hear.